One day my grandpa vanished like he'd never even existed. My dad and brother seized his business and pretended it had always been theirs. Years later at a family get-together, while my dad was loudly flaunting his money, my grandfather calmly walked in. My dad went pale like he'd just seen a ghost. What followed next tore our entire family to pieces. Can you even imagine having your own flesh and blood, your own family, try to bury your grandpa alive? For 5 agonizing years, they actually got away with it. But you know what they say about secrets. They always claw their way out. And when this one finally did, it didn't just unravel things, it detonated a bomb right in the heart of my family. Hey everyone, I'm Adam. I'm 33 now, living in this cozy little apartment on the 7th floor of an old building here in Austin, Texas. Every morning, that sweet, roasted coffee smell from the shop downstairs drifts right up to my window. It's a small, quiet life, a stark contrast to the chaotic world my dad and brother chose to inhabit. I'm an education consultant, which sounds fancy, right? Really, I just help schools make the most of their budgets while still nurturing students' dreams. It's not glamorous, but it feels right. Maybe that's why I've always flat out refused to step foot into the sprawling empire they run, Apex Solutions. That cold, corporate name still grates on me, because it used to be Horizon Corporation, my grandpa Silas's company. I'm not someone who constantly looks backward, but trust me, if I don't tell you this story, you'll never truly understand why there's this constant, heavy ache in my chest, like my heart's being squeezed tight. Austin, with its oak-lined streets and vibrant music scene, was once my childhood playground. A place where I felt safe in my mom's loving arms and grounded by my grandpa's steady presence. Now, it just feels like a mirror, reflecting all the broken pieces of my family. Cracks I've tried desperately to mend, but never could. So, let me tell you about them. About the people who shaped me, and about the secret that's been smoldering, waiting for the day it finally exploded. Austin now isn't the same artsy town I remember. It's a tech hub, all gleaming glass towers and Teslas choking the streets. Right downtown, the headquarters of Apex Solutions stands tall, a symbol of sheer, undeniable power. That building, with its deep blue glass and cold, sharp logo, was once my grandpa Silas's pride and joy. He built Horizon Corporation from absolutely nothing, turning it into a beacon of ethics and sustainability. We're talking next-gen solar panels, water recycling for communities in need. Truly impactful stuff. Grandpa used to say, making money isn't hard, but making money while keeping your conscience clear. That's the real challenge. I remember being a kid, walking through those polished hallways with him and my brother, Leo. He'd point to photos on the walls, projects in Africa, solar farms in Nevada, and talk about the responsibility that comes with business. You boys must remember, he'd say, his voice deep and solid as stone, money is a tool, not a goal. I, just an 8-year-old, would nod eagerly, trying to grasp it all. But Leo, my older brother, he'd just offer a faint smile, his eyes already glinting with an ambition I wouldn't fully recognize until years later. Then, in 2020, everything shattered. My grandpa Silas went missing. He was on a hunting trip in Colorado, a place he loved, where he'd go to talk to nature, as he put it. But this time, he never came back. The police scoured the mountains. Helicopters flew overhead. Rescue teams searched every cave. Nothing. No trace. No body. Just his wool cap, found by a shallow stream. They concluded he was gone. Probably attacked by an animal or fallen into a ravine. But me? I never bought it. Grandpa Silas wasn't the kind of man who just vanished. He was disciplined, meticulous, every step carefully planned. But I was the only one in the family who refused to accept that story. And because of that, I became the outcast. I'm not the kind of guy who thrives at corporate galas or boardroom meetings. Give me a quiet morning with a book, or sitting with my mom, listening to her stories about planting the first oak trees in our family garden. I studied education, graduated with honors, but instead of joining Horizon Corporation like my dad and brother expected, I chose my own path. My father, Julian Thorne, called it a betrayal. Leo, my brother, just sneered. "You're an idiot, Adam. You had an empire at your fingertips, and you chose to do the work of dreamers." I don't blame them. Not entirely. Dad, Julian, and Leo had their reasons for seeing things that way. Horizon Corporation, or Apex Solutions as it became, was a money-making machine. But I started seeing the stains, the dirty projects creeping in after Grandpa Silas disappeared. Shady deals with politicians, factories ignoring environmental standards, money from questionable sources. I remember one family dinner. Dad Julian was bragging about an oil drilling project in Alaska. "Dad," I said, my voice trembling with anger, "Grandpa would never have agreed to this." He just looked at me, eyes cold as steel. "Silas is dead, Adam. This is my time." That night, I left the house with a suitcase and a heavy heart. Since then, I've been on my own, only occasionally visiting my mom, the only tie left to what I once called home. My father, Julian Thorne, whose real name is Julian Marino, is a man of contradictions. He came from Colombia, a young man with big dreams and a brilliant mind. Grandpa Silas saw his talent, mentored him, gave him opportunities. He even gave him my mother, Eleanor Whitmore, in marriage, despite the entire Whitmore clan's objections. "Julian is a man of the future," Grandpa once said. "He's got fire in his eyes." And in the early years, Dad Julian didn't disappoint. He worked tirelessly, turning Grandpa's visions into reality. But after Mom Eleanor gave birth to Leo and me, something shifted. I'll never forget the look in his eyes when Grandpa announced his retirement plans, intending to hand control to an independent board, not a single person. Dad Julian didn't say a word, but he gripped his wine glass so tightly I thought it would shatter. After Grandpa vanished, Dad Julian swiftly took control. He rebranded the company Apex Solutions, erasing every trace of Grandpa's legacy. The photos of ethical projects disappeared. The values Grandpa lived by, ethics, sustainability, were replaced with new mantras: profit, expansion, power. Sometimes I look at my father and wonder where the man who knelt to propose to my mother, who held me and Leo in his arms, has gone. And then there's my mother, Eleanor. To describe her, I picture a shimmering glass flower, beautiful, but so fragile, though she'd never admit it. Eleanor Whitmore Thorne, the only daughter of Grandpa Silas, grew up under his protective wing. She's kind, loves nature, and has a heart so big it feels like it doesn't belong in this world. When she married my father, many in the Whitmore family objected, calling him an opportunist. But she didn't care. "Love doesn't need a resume," she once told me. But after Grandpa went missing, she changed. She became quiet, her eyes always tinged with sadness. She spoke less, smiled less, and her health began to fade. I know she misses him, her father, who was not just the family's pillar, but her closest confidant. Every time I visit, she sits by the window, looking out at the now withered garden, telling me stories about him. "Adam, your grandfather was a special man," she'd say, her voice trembling. "He'd never abandon us." I wanted to believe her, but 5 years is a long time. Still, every time I look into her eyes, I see a faint spark of hope, as if she knows something I don't. Leo, my brother, is 2 years older, but the gap between us feels like a century. He's a carbon copy of our father, ambitious, cold, always able to bend others to his will. When we were kids, we were close. He taught me how to tie a tie, throw a baseball, how to get back up after a fall. But as we grew up, Leo changed. He started looking at me with disdain, as if I were weak, unworthy of the Thorne name. Leo joined Horizon Corporation right out of college, quickly becoming Dad Julian's right-hand man. And when Grandpa vanished, he was the first to support renaming the company. "Whitmore is the past," he declared at a family meeting, his voice sharp as a knife. "Thorn is the future." I tried to argue, but he just smirked. "Adam, you don't understand how the world works. Leo doesn't just want power. He craves recognition, to stand above everyone. I know he's prepping for a huge move, a global IPO for Apex Solutions that will catapult him and our father to the top of the financial elite. But every time I look into his eyes, I see an emptiness where family love used to be. And then there's the man I admired most, my Grandpa Silas. He was respected by everyone in Austin. At 75, he was still tall, with white hair and eyes sharp as a hawk. He wasn't just the founder of Horizon Corporation. He was a symbol of integrity. He turned down countless lucrative contracts because they didn't align with his values. "Money can buy a lot," he'd say, "but it can't buy a good night's sleep." The day he went missing, my world collapsed. I remember that morning. Dad Julian got the call from the rescue team. He sank into a chair, his face pale, but no tears. Leo was busy on the phone with lawyers and the board. Only my mother cried, sobbing so hard I had to hold her to keep her from falling apart. The police searched for weeks, found nothing. Headlines screamed, "Horizon Corporation founder mysteriously disappears." Then they declared him dead. But I don't believe it. I can't. In the nights that followed, I'd dream of him, covered in wounds, calling for help. I'd run towards him, but the closer I got, the farther he seemed. I'd wake up sweating, heart pounding. I've asked myself countless times, is he really dead? And if he's alive, where is he? Why hasn't he come back? These questions haunt me day after day, and I can't find the answers. My family, or what's left of it, truly fell apart the day my grandpa vanished. Dad Julian and Leo saw it as an opportunity, transforming Horizon Corporation into Apex Solutions, as if to erase every trace of him. My mom Eleanor sank deeper into her grief, while I became an outcast, pushed to the sidelines by the very people I loved. But I couldn't just stand by. I couldn't let everything slide into darkness. In the months after Grandpa's disappearance, I began to realize that my father and brother didn't just want to run the company. They wanted to own it, completely and absolutely. I still remember the first shareholders meeting I attended, just weeks after the search for Grandpa was called off. I went hoping for a clear plan, a commitment to his mission. Instead, I witnessed a meticulously staged performance. Dad Julian stood at the podium, sleek black suit, his voice deep and commanding. "Horizon Corporation has entered a new era," he declared, his gaze sweeping the crowd like a king. "We will expand. We will go global. And to do that, we need a new name. Apex Solutions." The room erupted in applause. I sat in the back row, clenching my fists so tightly my nails dug into my palms. Leo stood beside my father, a smug smile on his face, as if this was the moment he'd been waiting for his entire life. I wanted to stand up, to scream that they were betraying my grandfather, betraying the very values this company was built on. But I couldn't. I just sat there, powerless, watching them erase Grandpa's legacy with a new name. After the meeting, Leo approached me, still with that faint, mocking smile. "Adam, you're too late," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "This isn't a place for dreamers." I didn't respond. I just stood up and walked away, a burning anger in my chest. On the drive home, I thought of Grandpa Silas. His sharp eyes, his warm, steady voice. He would never have let this happen, but he wasn't here anymore. Apex Solutions didn't take long to show its true colors. Just a few months later, I started hearing whispers about their new projects. Projects my grandfather would have called crimes. A petrochemical plant in Louisiana dumping untreated waste straight into the river. A logging contract in the Amazon, despite the company's former commitment to environmental protection. And then that oil drilling project in Alaska, the one Dad Julian proudly boasted about at dinner as if it were his greatest achievement. I couldn't stay silent. That evening, at the sprawling family home in the Austin suburbs, I confronted my father. My mom sat at the head of the table, quietly stirring her cold soup. Leo sipped his wine, his eyes fixed on me, waiting for my move. Dad, Grandpa would never have agreed to the Alaska project, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. It goes against everything Horizon Corporation stood for. My father set down his glass and looked at me with icy eyes. Silas isn't here anymore. I'm running the company now, and I know how to make money. Make money by destroying the environment. By cozying up to corrupt politicians. I couldn't hold back anymore. Do you even know the cost of those deals? Leo let out a dry laugh. Adam, you're such an idiot. The world doesn't run on your lofty ideals. Money is king, and we're doing what's necessary to keep this company at the top. My mother looked up, her eyes misty with tears. Adam, stop talking, she whispered. Just let it go. But I couldn't. Mom, I can't let them destroy Grandpa's legacy. I can't just stand by and watch. My father slammed the table, making the dishes rattle. Enough, Adam. If you don't want to be part of this family, then get out. I don't need a son who's always living in some moral fantasy. I stood up, my heart feeling utterly crushed. My mother reached for me, but I shook my head. I'm sorry, Mom. I can't stay. I drove back to my apartment, tears streaming down my face. I wasn't crying because of my father's words, but because I felt like I'd lost everything, my family, my grandfather, and the belief that things would ever be okay again. In the years that followed, I lived like a shadow. I worked, I saw friends, but there was always this gnawing emptiness inside me. I rarely went home, only occasionally visiting my mother, who grew frilier with each passing day. Every time I saw her, I could feel her pain, the pain of a woman who had lost her father and felt abandoned by her husband and eldest son in her own home. One time she took my hand, her fingers cold and trembling. Adam, do you ever think your grandfather might still be alive? She asked, her voice faint as a passing breeze. I froze. Mom, what are you saying? She looked out at the withered garden, her eyes distant. Silas was a strong man. He couldn't just vanish like that. Something's not right, Adam. I know it. I squeezed her hand, my heart pounding. I think so too, Mom, but I don't know what to do. No one believes me. She turned to look at me, a rare spark of hope in her eyes. You're my hope, Adam. You have to find the truth. Her words lit a small fire inside me. I started digging into old information about Grandpa's disappearance. I reread newspaper articles, police reports, and the notes I'd kept from 5 years ago. Everything pointed to one conclusion: no body, no concrete evidence. Just his wool cap, found almost too perfectly by the stream, as if someone wanted it to be found. I began to suspect something deeper, something darker. But suspicion alone wasn't enough. I needed proof, and I didn't know where to start. While I was lost in these unanswered questions, Apex Solutions kept growing. My father and Leo appeared in headlines, praised as visionary leaders. But I knew the truth. I heard rumors from my grandfather's old colleagues, people who had been fired or forced to resign. They talked about large sums of money transferred overseas, deals signed in the shadows, shady connections with powerful politicians. I tried reaching out to a few, but most refused to talk. Adam, you don't understand, one whispered over the phone. This company isn't Silas's anymore. You need to be careful. Careful? I wasn't afraid, but I was alone. Every time I tried to talk to Leo, he just smirked and called me paranoid. One rare moment when he actually agreed to meet me at a cafe, I asked him directly, "Leo, do you know anything about Grandpa? Is there something you're hiding?" He looked at me, his eyes cold and unfeeling. "Adam, you need to grow up. He's dead. It happens. People die and the world keeps spinning. If you want to live in the past forever, go ahead. But don't drag me and Dad down with you." I left that cafe feeling like I'd been stabbed in the heart. Leo wasn't just my brother. He used to be my best friend. Now he looked at me like I was an enemy. Then, on a late October night, everything changed. I was sitting in my apartment, the light from my desk lamp illuminating a pile of papers. Outside, a gentle rain pattered against the window. The doorbell rang, sharp and sudden, making me jump. I glanced at the clock, nearly 10 p.m. Who would come at this hour? I wasn't expecting anyone, and my friends knew I hated being disturbed at night. I stood up, my heart pounding inexplicably fast. I walked to the door and peered through the peephole. A man stood there, his head covered by a hood, his face obscured in shadow. I hesitated, my hand on the doorknob, but then a strange compulsion. I opened the door. The man looked up, and as the hallway light hit his face, the blood in my veins froze. Silver-white hair, hawk-like eyes, though now clouded by time and suffering. It was my Grandpa Silas. "Adam," he said, his voice low and hoarse, as if he hadn't spoken in a long time. "Can you let me in?" I stood frozen, unable to believe my eyes. "Grandpa," I stammered, feeling the ground beneath me give way, "you're alive." He smiled, a tired but warm smile. "Let's go inside, Adam. We have a lot to talk about." I let him in, still in shock. He sat down in my old armchair, taking off his hood to reveal a gaunt face etched with new wrinkles. He wore a worn wool coat, a far cry from the polished suits I remembered. But his eyes, those eyes were still sharp, still full of resolve, as if nothing in the world could break him. I brewed a cup of hot tea and placed it in front of him, my hands trembling so much I spilled a little. "Grandpa, where have you been for the past 5 years?" I asked, my voice choking. "Everyone said you were dead. I tried to find you, but..." He raised a hand, signaling me to stop. "Adam, I know you never gave up. That's why I'm here tonight." He took a deep breath, as if steeling himself to tell a story he'd kept buried for too long. "But first, you need to promise me one thing. What I'm about to tell you, you can't tell anyone." I nodded, my heart pounding. "I promise, Grandpa." "Tell me." And so he began. 5 years ago, during that hunting trip in Colorado, everything had been orchestrated. He hadn't gone alone, as the newspapers reported. Julian, my father, and Leo had gone with him. They said it would be a family bonding trip, he said, his voice bitter. But I had my suspicions. Julian had changed long before then. His ambition was greater than I'd ever imagined. He recounted how in the cold forest, my father and Leo led him to a remote stream. They said they wanted to stop and rest, but then, in a moment he hadn't anticipated, they pushed him into a ravine. I fell hard, Adam, but I didn't die. A shepherd living nearby found him, took him to his cabin, and tended to his wounds. I sat there, gripping the edge of the table, feeling like the world was turning upside down. "Dad, Julian and Leo," I whispered, "they tried to kill you." My grandfather nodded, his eyes darkening. "They thought I was dead. They needed me gone to take full control. Julian always wanted this company, Adam. He didn't just want to run it. He wanted to own it. To erase my name from Horizon Corporation's legacy." My throat tightened, tears welling up. "But why didn't you come back right away? Why did you let us think you were dead?" He placed a hand on my shoulder, his grip thin, but still strong. I needed time, Adam. Time to gather evidence. Time to make sure that when I returned, Julian and Leo wouldn't be able to deny it. I've spent 5 years in the shadows, reaching out to old friends, people still loyal to me. I have recordings, emails, documents, all proving their conspiracy. I cried, not out of sadness, but out of a raw mix of anger, pain, and a faint spark of hope igniting within me. My grandfather was alive. He was here, right in front of me, and he needed me. What do you want me to do? I asked, wiping my tears with the back of my hand. I'll do anything to make this right. He looked at me, his eyes brightening slightly. Adam, you're the only one I trust. You haven't been blinded by power. You have your mother's heart and my resolve. I want you to help me expose the truth, but it won't be easy. Julian and Leo have influence, money, and they'll do anything to protect what they've built. I nodded, though a storm of emotions raged inside me. I'll do it, Grandpa. I'll help you. He smiled for the first time that night, and I saw the man I'd always admired. Good, he said. But we need to be careful. Julian isn't a fool, and Leo is even more dangerous. They can't know I'm back. Not until we're ready. A few days later, Grandpa Silas took me to a small house on the outskirts of Austin where he was hiding. It was a modest wooden cabin, tucked behind old oak trees, far from the city's bustle. He said he'd rented it through an intermediary to avoid detection. I still couldn't believe he was here, alive and breathing, after 5 years of thinking he was gone forever. Adam, there's one more person who needs to know the truth, he said, his voice lowering. Your mother. I froze. But you said not to tell anyone. He nodded. I did, but Eleanor is my daughter. She deserves to know, and I'm worried about her health. She needs something to give her strength to carry on. I agreed, though I was still uneasy. My mother was so frail, both physically and emotionally. Would the fact that my grandfather was alive outweigh the pain of the truth about my father and Leo? I called my mother, telling her I wanted her to come to my apartment to talk. When she arrived, I gently explained that I had a special surprise and needed her to come with me. She looked at me, her eyes full of doubt, but she agreed. I drove her to the cabin, saying little. On the way, she sat beside me, her hands clasped tightly, her gaze distant. When we walked into the cabin, my grandfather was waiting in the living room. My mother saw him, and time seemed to stop. She froze, her lips trembling, then burst into tears. Dad! Dad, she whispered, rushing into his arms. My grandfather held her tightly, tears streaming down his weathered face. Eleanor, my daughter, I'm sorry for making you wait so long. I stood there watching them, my heart breaking with both joy and pain. My mother sobbed as if all the grief of the past 5 years was pouring out. He told her everything, the hunting trip, the plot by my father and Leo, and the years he'd spent in hiding. My mother listened, her face shifting from shock to pain, and finally, to fury. Julian, she whispered, her voice trembling with anger. He did this to you. My grandfather took her hand. Eleanor, I know this is hard to accept, but I need you to be strong. We're going to take back what belongs to this family, and Adam will help us. My mother turned to me, her eyes sparking with a determination I hadn't seen in years. Adam, you're my hope. You have to do this. I nodded, feeling a new weight settle on my shoulders. This wasn't just my grandfather's fight. It was mine, my mother's, and the legacy my grandfather had built. In the days that followed, my grandfather and I began to plan. He showed me the evidence he'd collected over the past 5 years, emails between my father and Leo, recordings of their conversations, documents proving the illegal transfer of Horizon Corporation assets. Each piece of evidence was like a knife to the heart. I grew up in my father's arms. I once admired his intelligence and decisiveness, but now I saw only a traitor. My grandfather contacted a legal team he trusted, old friends from his days running the company. They helped us verify his legal identity, ensuring that when he reappeared, no one could question that he was Arthur Silas Whitmore. They also prepared documents to sue my father and Leo, accusing them of attempted murder, embezzlement, and destroying the company's legacy. Meanwhile, I secretly met with my mother every week, ensuring she was okay and not revealing any signs of my grandfather's return. She started eating better, and her eyes gradually regained their spark. "Adam, I've never felt so alive," she said during one visit. "Your grandfather is back, and I believe you'll do the right thing." But I couldn't deny the growing fear in my heart. My father and Leo were not to be underestimated. They had money, power, and people willing to do anything to protect them. If I failed, not only would my grandfather and mother be in danger, but I could lose everything. One evening, as my grandfather and I reviewed the documents, he suddenly stopped and looked at me with a serious expression. "Adam, I've rewritten my will," he said. "I've revoked all previous authorizations. All the assets, shares, and control of the company. I'm leaving them to you." I was stunned. "Grandpa, I'm not sure I can," he cut me off. "You can, Adam. You're the only one I trust. You'll bring Horizon Corporation back to its rightful path. I believe in you." I didn't know what to say. The responsibility was immense, overwhelming. But looking into his eyes, I knew I couldn't refuse. This wasn't just about the company. It was about justice, about family, about righting the wrongs of the past. As I left the cabin that night, the rain had stopped, leaving a sky full of twinkling stars. I stood on the porch, breathing in the cool air, feeling a new strength coursing through my veins. My grandfather was back, and he had chosen me. I was no longer the outcast of the family. I was the one who would stand up, face my father and Leo, and bring the truth to light. But I knew the real battle was still ahead, and it wouldn't be easy. 2 weeks later, a crisp white envelope arrived at my apartment. I picked it up from the doormat, surprised to see the words Apex Solutions embossed on the paper. Inside was an invitation with handwritten lines in gold ink. "You are cordially invited, Adam Thorne, to attend the family reunion celebrating the 5th anniversary of the successful transition from Horizon Corporation to Apex Solutions. Time, 7 p.m., November 15. Location, Apex Solutions Headquarters, Austin, Texas." I held the invitation, feeling as if it were burning my hand. A family reunion. Since when did my father and Leo care about including me? For 5 years, they had pushed me out of everything. Treated me like an outsider. Why were they inviting me now? I called my mother, the only person in the family I still trusted, to ask if she knew anything about this. "Adam, I got an invitation, too," she said over the phone, her voice frail, but tinged with determination. "I'm going, and you should, too. This is our chance to do what needs to be done." I understood what she meant. She knew the truth about my grandfather, about my father and Leo's plot. And she wanted me to bring him to this event, not just for a reunion, but to expose everything. I went to my grandfather that same evening in the wooden cabin. He was sitting in an armchair, holding a cup of tea, his eyes lighting up when I told him about the invitation. "This is our moment, Adam," he said, his voice low and resolute. "Julian and Leo think they've won. They want to flaunt their victory in front of the media, the shareholders. But they don't know I'm back, and we're going to make them pay." I nodded, my heart pounding. "But Grandpa, what if they suspect something? What if they find out about you before we're ready?" He placed a hand on my shoulder, his gaze piercing through me. "Adam, I survived 5 years in the shadows. I know how to keep a secret. And you? You're the one who will stand with me. We have the evidence, the truth, and Eleanor will do this." In the days leading up to the event, my grandfather and I worked tirelessly. We met with his legal team, a group of seasoned lawyers who had worked with him during Horizon Corporation's heyday. They helped us organize the evidence, recordings of my father and Leo discussing their plan to eliminate my grandfather, emails detailing illegal transactions, and asset maps showing how they had unlawfully transferred company shares. Each piece of evidence was like a bullet ready to be fired at the right moment. I also met with my mother in secret several times to ensure she was strong enough to face what was coming. She had changed since reuniting with my grandfather. She was no longer the frail, quiet woman I'd known. A small fire burned in her eyes, though I knew she was still pained by the thought of my father's betrayal. "Adam, I'm not sure I want to do this," she said during one meeting at my apartment, her hands clasped tightly together. "But I have to. For your grandfather, for you, and for myself." I hugged her, feeling the fragile but fierce determination within her. "Mom, I'll be with you. Grandpa will be, too. We'll get through this together." On the evening of November 15th, I stood in front of the mirror in my apartment, putting on a navy blue suit I rarely touched. I looked at myself, barely recognizing the man with cold eyes and tense shoulders. I was no longer Adam Thorne, the education consultant living a quiet life. I was Adam Thorne, the man who would walk into the lion's den, armed with the truth, to bring down those who had betrayed my family. I drove to Apex Solutions headquarters, my heart pounding. The glass building glowed under the lights, the giant logo gleaming like a declaration of power. Inside, the main hall had been transformed into a lavish banquet room, with long tables draped in white silk, sparkling wine glasses, and soft jazz music playing from a live band. Shareholders, business partners, and media reporters mingled, laughing and clinking glasses. The air was thick with self-satisfaction, as if everyone believed Apex Solutions was invincible. I walked in, feeling curious, and disdainful glances turned toward me. "That's Adam, Julian's youngest son," I heard. "He doesn't work for the company. The oddball of the Thorne family." I ignored them all, searching for my mother in the crowd. She stood in a corner, wearing a long emerald green dress, her eyes lighting up when she saw me. I approached, took her hand, and whispered, "Mom, Grandpa's ready." She nodded, her lips pressed tightly together. "So am I, Adam." The event began with my father's speech. He stood at the podium, dressed in a sleek black suit, his voice booming through the sound system. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, a confident smile on his lips. "Today marks a significant milestone. 5 years ago, we transitioned from Horizon Corporation to Apex Solutions, and today we stand here as one of the world's leading conglomerates. This is the achievement of the Thorne family, of me, of my son Leo, and of all of you." The room erupted in applause. I stood in the corner, clenching my fists. "The Thorne family," he said, as if my mother and I didn't exist. As if my grandfather hadn't laid the foundation for everything they had. Leo took the podium next, continuing where my father left off. He looked impeccable in a gray suit, his hair neatly slicked back, his voice smooth like a politician's. "Apex Solutions is about to enter a new era," he declared. "We are preparing for a global IPO, taking our company to the world's stock markets. This is the moment to solidify our position, not just in America, but across the globe." Another round of applause. My stomach churned. I glanced at my mother, seeing her grip her wine glass tightly, her eyes holding back a storm. I knew the moment had come. I left the room, pretending to head to the restroom, but in reality, I went to meet my grandfather. He was waiting in a discreet hallway behind the building, dressed in a silver-gray suit, leaning on a cane, his white hair neatly combed. Despite his age, he exuded an unmistakable presence, the presence of Silas Whitmore, the founder of Horizon Corporation. "Are you ready, Adam?" he asked, his eyes sharp. I took a deep breath. "I'm ready, Grandpa." We walked into the room, and immediately the atmosphere shifted. Whispers rippled through the crowd, eyes turning toward us. I led the way, clearing a path for my grandfather. He walked slowly, but each step was like a declaration. When we reached the center of the room, my father and Leo were still at the podium, their faces shifting from smugness to utter shock. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said loudly, my voice trembling with emotion, but clear. "I'd like to introduce someone we all thought was gone forever." I paused, letting the silence hang heavy. Mr. Silas Whitmore, the founder of Horizon Corporation. The room fell silent. Some jaws dropped, others stood up in shock. My father froze, the wine glass in his hand trembling. Leo paled, his eyes burning into me. My grandfather stepped onto the podium, leaning on his cane, but his posture was as upright as an oak. "I am Silas Whitmore," he said, his voice resonating through the room. "And I am not dead. 5 years ago, I was betrayed by the people I trusted most. Julian Thorne and Leo Thorne staged an accident to eliminate me, to seize this company." Murmurs erupted like waves. I looked at my father, seeing him struggle to maintain his composure, but his lips were pressed tightly together, and I knew he was panicking. Leo stepped forward, his voice sharp. "What is this charade? That man cannot be Silas Whitmore. He's dead." My grandfather smiled, a cold, knowing smile. "Julian, Leo, did you think I wouldn't return? Did you think you could erase my name, steal my legacy, and live in peace?" He signaled to me. I stepped forward, carrying a small projector the legal team had prepared. A large screen was lowered, and I began presenting the evidence we had gathered. First came the recording. My father and Leo's voices, unmistakable, discussing pushing my grandfather into the ravine. "He won't survive," my father's voice rang out, cold and ruthless. "We'll say it was an accident." The room went silent. Some shareholders covered their mouths, eyes wide with horror. I continued, displaying emails between my father and a local politician discussing the illegal transfer of Horizon Corporation shares. Finally, I showed the asset map, revealing millions of dollars funneled offshore through shell companies. My mother stood up from her seat, her face streaked with tears, but her voice strong. "Julian, what have you done to my father?" She walked to the podium, facing my father. "You tried to kill my father. You betrayed me. Betrayed this family." My father stepped back, his face pale. "Eleanor, you don't understand. This is a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" My mother's voice broke with fury. "My father and I always believed in you, supported you in every way when you first came to America. And you? You tried to murder my father. You're a wolf in sheep's clothing. Ungrateful." Leo tried to interject, his voice trembling. "Everyone, this is a conspiracy. That man is not Silas Whitmore. He's an imposter." But my grandfather was prepared. He produced identification documents verified by the legal team and a short video from the shepherd in Colorado who had saved him 5 years ago. "I am Silas Whitmore," he said again, his voice like thunder. "And I've returned to take back what belongs to me, to my family, to Horizon Corporation." The room erupted in murmurs, like a wave breaking after being held back too long. Some shareholders stood, their voices rising in outrage, demanding an immediate investigation. Reporters swarmed like vultures, cameras flashing, capturing every moment. But then the noise stopped abruptly as the main doors of the room swung open and a group of uniformed police officers walked in, sidearms holstered, their cold gazes sweeping the crowd. I stood frozen, my heart pounding. They had arrived faster than I expected. My grandfather's legal team had been quietly working with the FBI in the days leading up to this, and now the moment of justice had come. A tall, stern-faced police chief stepped onto the podium, raising a hand for silence. "Julian Thorne, Leo Thorne," he said, his voice resounding like a verdict. You are under arrest for charges of conspiracy to commit murder, embezzlement, and financial fraud. The room fell silent. I looked at my father, seeing him step back, his face pale, his hands trembling. Leo tried to bolt for a side door, but two officers blocked him, grabbing his arms. The click of handcuffs echoed, sharp like a blade cutting through the air. My father tried to maintain his composure, but as the cuffs tightened around his wrists, I saw a flicker of panic in his eyes, something I'd never seen in the man who was always so confident. "You're making a mistake," Leo shouted, his voice cracking with anger and fear. "This is a conspiracy. That man is not Silas Whitmore." But no one listened. The shareholders watched in shock, some covering their mouths, eyes wide with horror. My mother stood in the corner, clutching her dress, tears streaming down her face. I wanted to run to her, to tell her everything would be okay, but I couldn't move. I stood there, watching my father and Leo being led out of the room amid the flashing cameras and the jeers of the crowd. As the doors closed behind them, a heavy silence settled over the room. A sharp pain stabbed at my chest. This was my father, the man who taught me how to tie my shoes when I was 5. This was Leo, the brother who carried me on his shoulders through summer fields. Now they were being led away like criminals, and I didn't know how to feel. Angry? Heartbroken? Or relieved? My grandfather raised a hand, signaling for silence. The room quieted, all eyes turning to him. His voice rang out, steady and unyielding, like a mountain that could not be shaken. "Today, we have witnessed the truth. But the truth is not just for exposing. It's for rebuilding. I have drafted a new will. All my authority, shares, and assets will be transferred to my grandson, Adam Thorne. He is the only one in this family who has not been blinded by power. He will lead Horizon Corporation back to its rightful path." I felt my blood run cold. Every eye in the room turned to me, curious, skeptical, and a few filled with hope. I wanted to say something, to protest, to say I wasn't worthy, that I wasn't ready. But my throat tightened, as if gripped by an invisible hand. I wasn't the man my grandfather described, the strong, decisive leader ready to take on an empire. I was just Adam, the education consultant who liked quiet mornings and old books. The responsibility he'd placed on my shoulders felt like a mountain, and I wasn't sure I could carry it. I looked at my mother, her eyes shining with a determination I hadn't seen in years. She nodded at me, as if saying she believed in me. I looked at my grandfather, seeing his sharp but trusting gaze. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't turn back. Not because I wanted power, but because I wanted justice. For my grandfather, for my mother, and for myself. I stepped onto the podium, my legs heavy, but unwavering. I took a deep breath, trying to quell the storm of emotions inside me. "I don't promise to be perfect," I said, my voice trembling but clear, echoing through the room. "But I promise to do everything I can to bring Horizon Corporation back to what my grandfather built. A company of integrity, responsibility, and a future." The room was silent for a moment. Then a few people began to clap. The applause spread, growing into a thunderous ovation. I looked at my mother, seeing her smile through her tears. I looked at my grandfather, seeing him nod, his eyes shining with pride. And in that moment, I knew that no matter how difficult the road ahead would be, I wouldn't walk it alone. The next morning, Austin was shaken to its core. Major newspapers, from the New York Times to the Austin Chronicle, ran headlines screaming, "Horizon Corporation founder returns from the dead. Accuses son-in-law and grandson of murder plot." Images of my grandfather standing tall at the podium with a steely gaze flooded social media. Videos from the family reunion spread like wildfire, accompanied by the chilling audio of my father and Leo coldly discussing how to eliminate him. The world was ablaze, and Apex Solutions, the name my father and Leo had so proudly built, was now at the center of a shocking scandal. The FBI acted swiftly. Just hours after the event, my grandfather's legal team handed over all the evidence to the authorities. Federal agents raided Apex Solutions headquarters, sealing offices and seizing computers and documents. My father and Leo's personal assets, from their mansion in the Austin suburbs to their offshore bank accounts, were frozen. I heard from an old friend at the company that my father had tried to call his personal lawyer, but no one would take the case. "They know Julian and Leo don't stand a chance," my friend said, his voice tinged with regret. "The evidence is too clear, Adam." I didn't know how to feel. Part of me wanted justice. Wanted my father and Leo to pay for what they'd done. But another part, the son, the brother, ached at the thought of them in handcuffs, led away under the world's gaze. I tried to push those thoughts out of my mind, but they clung to me like shadows that wouldn't let go. In the weeks that followed, the media turned my family story into a sensational drama. Talk shows brought in commentators to dissect every detail, from the fateful hunting trip in Colorado to my grandfather's years in hiding. Some tabloids even fabricated stories, claiming he had lived in a cave or become a hermit. I wanted to laugh when I read those articles, but my laughter was bitter. The truth was painful enough without their embellishments. My mother became the center of attention, though she didn't want it. Reporters swarmed her house, trying to snap photos through the windows, attempting to interview her about her traitorous husband. I had to hire security to keep them at bay, shielding her from the relentless media pounding. My grandfather, on the other hand, handled the attention with remarkable calm. He agreed to an exclusive interview with a reputable newspaper, recounting his story concisely, but with undeniable weight. "I didn't come back for fame or power," he said on television, his eyes fixed on the camera. "I came back for justice and for the people I love." His words were like a flame, igniting hope in the hearts of those who had once worked for Horizon Corporation. Many former employees, fired by my father and Leo, reached out to me, expressing their desire to return. They called me Silas's heir, though I felt utterly unprepared for such a title. The trial of my father and Leo dragged on for nearly 6 months, but the outcome was inevitable. The FBI, with the support of my grandfather's legal team, built an airtight case: conspiracy to commit murder, embezzlement of millions of dollars, money laundering through shell companies, and the destruction of Horizon Corporation's legacy. The trial was closely followed by the media, with new headlines every day: "Son-in-law betrays Silas Whitmore." "Leo Thorne faces life in prison." I didn't attend the trial. I couldn't. The thought of sitting there watching my father and Leo behind the defendant's stand, listening to them justify their crimes, made me feel suffocated. But my mother went, despite my attempts to stop her. "I need to see it with my own eyes, Adam," she said. "I need to know justice has been served." When the verdict came, she called me, her voice trembling but calm. "Julian was sentenced to 20 years for conspiracy to commit murder and embezzlement," she said. "Leo got 15 years for complicity and financial fraud. They won't be out anytime soon, Adam." I sank into a chair, gripping the phone tightly. "Mom, are you okay?" I asked, though I knew the answer. She was silent for a moment, then said, "I'm okay, but I need time." I understood. I needed time, too. I wasn't happy about their sentencing, but I wasn't as sad as I thought I'd be. Perhaps I'd lost them long ago, the day they chose to betray my grandfather, to betray our family. But the pain lingered, like a scar that would never fully heal. Entrusted by my grandfather, I officially took over Apex Solutions, or rather, restored it to its original name, Horizon Corporation. The day I signed the decision to change the name, I stood in the company's main boardroom, staring at the cold, impersonal Apex logo on the wall. "Take it down," I told the staff, my voice steadier than I felt. "We're bringing Horizon Corporation back." The overhaul wasn't easy. My father and Leo had left a mess. Shady contracts, environmentally damaging projects, and a workforce that had lost faith. I worked day and night with a team of advisors my grandfather recommended, canceling projects that didn't align with the company's values. We pulled out of the Alaska oil drilling project, reinvested in clean energy, and committed to transparent transactions. I rehired former employees who had been loyal to my grandfather, listening to their ideas on how to steer the company back on track. But the hardest part wasn't the work. It was the internal pressure. Every day I faced the question of whether I was capable of carrying my grandfather's legacy. Some nights I sat alone in my office, staring at an old photo of him on the wall, asking myself, "Grandpa, am I doing this right?" One time, lost in those thoughts, my mother came to the office. She placed a hand on my shoulder, her gaze gentle but firm. "Adam, you don't have to be perfect," she said. "You just have to be honest, like your grandfather. That's all Horizon Corporation needs." Her words were like a cool breeze, easing some of my doubts. I began to believe I could do it, not because I was exceptional, but because I had my mother and grandfather by my side, and because I believed in the values my grandfather had passed down. During a board meeting, I proposed an idea I'd been nurturing for a long time, a nonprofit fund named after my mother, the Eleanor Foundation. It would support women who had been deceived and hurt in marriage, providing counseling, financial aid, and opportunities to rebuild their lives. I thought of my mother, of the years she lived in the shadow of betrayal, and I wanted to ensure no one else had to endure what she had. When I presented the idea, some shareholders were skeptical. "Adam, we've just gone through a crisis," one said. "Is this really the time to invest in a charitable fund?" I looked him in the eye, my voice calm, but resolute. Horizon Corporation isn't just about profit. It's about people. And if we don't help those who need us, we're no different from Apex Solutions. The room fell silent. Then one person clapped, then another. Eventually, the entire board agreed. The Eleanor Foundation was born, and when my mother heard the news, she hugged me tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Adam, you've made me proud," she said. "This is what I've always wanted, something good amidst all this pain." One spring afternoon, I drove my mother to Colorado, where my grandfather had chosen to spend the rest of his days. He didn't return to running Horizon Corporation despite my attempts to persuade him. "Adam, I've done my part," he said gently. "Now it's your time. I just want to live in peace in the place that saved me." His house sat in a small valley, surrounded by snow-capped mountains. It was a simple log cabin with smoke rising from the chimney. In a small garden, he tended himself. When we arrived, he was sitting on the porch reading an old book, his eyes lighting up when he saw my mother. "Eleanor," he called, standing to embrace her. I stood watching, my heart warmed. My mother decided to stay with him, at least for a while, to heal the wounds in her heart. As I drove away from the valley, I glanced in the rearview mirror, seeing my mother and grandfather standing side by side, their figures shrinking under the sunset. I knew they would be okay, and so would I. Horizon Corporation began to revive. Our clean energy projects attracted new investors, drawn to my grandfather's comeback story and my commitment to ethical business. The Eleanor Foundation grew rapidly, supporting hundreds of women across the country. Each thank you letter from them was a reminder that I was on the right path. I no longer dreamed of my grandfather covered in wounds. Instead, I dreamed of the grassy fields where Leo and I used to play as kids, where my father once laughed heartily and held me close. Those dreams no longer woke me in a cold sweat. They reminded me that despite a painful past, I could build a better future. I stood in my office at Horizon Corporation, looking out at Austin's twinkling lights under the night sky. On my desk was a photo of my grandfather, my mother, and me taken the day I officially became the company's chairman. I was no longer the outcast. I was Adam Thorne, heir to Silas Whitmore's legacy, bearer of my mother's hope, and determined to rebuild from the ashes of the past. The road ahead was still long, but I wasn't afraid. I had my mother, my grandfather, and myself, a stronger Adam, ready to face any challenge. And somewhere deep in my heart, I knew justice had been served. Not just for my family, but for everything Horizon Corporation stood for. This journey, it's been intense, heartbreaking, and ultimately, profoundly transformative. I've had to make choices I never imagined. So tell me, if you were in my shoes, faced with such a shocking betrayal from your own family, what would you have done? Have you ever had to choose between loyalty and what's right? I really want to know what you think in the comments below.